that Trump has signed that executive order increasing tariff on Canada from 25% to 35%, with higher tariffs set to go into effect as of August 1st. That's midnight tonight. So that's the breaking news right now on the program, and you're with us. So let's break this down a little more further, because this tariff that we're speaking of, 25 to 35%, is specifically on goods that are non-CUSMA compliant. Help us understand better, what are the products you think are going to get most affected with this hike in tariffs?
Well, it's going to affect, I mean, the rules of origin in the Canada-US-Mexico agreement are fairly comprehensive and complex. I've seen studies suggesting that, as much as 60% of Canadian trade currently is CUSMA compliant in that it does abide by those rules of origin. It has a certain amount of North American content, which gives it tariff-free access to the United States and to Mexico. 60% is the current level from what I've read, and there's been some studies suggesting it could go as high as 89% of trade could be compliant with the Canada-US-Mexico agreement. It just means that companies have to go and get that certification through the United States, right, and Canadian side as well, to basically certify their goods as compliant, at which point it will cross the border tariff-free. So that's a very small amount of Canadian trade.
Okay.
The other thing to keep in mind is the most important tariffs affecting Canadian goods right now are still those metals tariffs, right? The 50% on copper as well, certain copper products, steel and aluminum, and then the 25% on autos down to, well, it's 12% if they contain 50% U.S. content. But those are the important ones, the ones that we hope that we could probably negotiate them away or negotiate them very low, if that's possible.
Stuart, I want to read out a quote that's come out on the wires right now, on Reuters specifically, saying, in response to Canada's continued inaction and retaliation, President Trump has found it necessary to increase the tariff on Canada from 25 to 35% to effectively address the existing emergency. But the emergency is from their point of view. But the fact, the language that they're using, Canada's continued inaction and retaliation, we know that we've been having our representatives. In fact, Dominic LeBlanc has been in Washington for X number of days trying to work out a deal with the United States. What do you make of this sort of a positioning where they say that Canada's continued inaction and retaliation?
It's just lies, right? I mean, it's economic coercion of the worst kind. The kind that we've been warned about is coming from China and other negative players on the global economy. That's what's happening here. It's our version of what they've done to Brazil this week, which is to, tell the Brazilian government that they have to stop a court case against the former president Bolsonaro. Remember, that case involved Bolsonaro's people trying to overthrow the election results. It's the same thing we're seeing in Canada. They're making things up. From reports we've seen about how the negotiations are going, Canada still doesn't have a very good idea of what the Trump administration wants. There's no list. They just simply keep talking and saying the same talking points. Mexico, it sounds like, went the other way and decided to give Trump a list of things that maybe he could peruse, like a menu, and say, this is good. I accept this, and they can move forward in that way. Canada's waiting to find out exactly what they want. We know that there's no real major border issue. They make more drugs in the States for U.S. consumption than we export over the border. This is a non-issue. This is coercion, and it's stalling, and we simply don't know what they want. Yeah,
weaponizing tariffs the way to try and get what they want. What they want is, of course, is the big question. But, Stuart, as I speak with you, there is more information coming in. You can help us break this down further. The White House is saying that goods transshipped to evade 35% tariff on Canada will be subject instead to a transshipment tariff of 40%. So that's an addition to what we've been speaking of all this while.
Yeah, I'd have to look at the details of that a little more closely. I mean, in the extreme, that sounds like they want Canada to basically reciprocate the tariffs they're putting on other countries. They want to make sure that goods that they put high tariffs on coming into the United States are not shipped into Canada and then through again into the United States, right? So that seems to be what's going on there. If it says up to 40%, that could be because other reciprocal tariffs that were also announced in a second executive order just a few minutes ago go up as high as 40%. Brazil, for example, is 40% across the board. So they want to avoid anything moving in through Mexico and Canada into the U.S. market where they've hit tariffs on those products at the U.S. border.
Okay, so we're of course awaiting now a response from the Prime Minister's office, from the Canadian government on how they're going to respond to it, because we are trying to reach out to the PMO. But meantime, if you were to understand the kind of action that Canadian government has taken since this entire trade war and the talk of negotiations and tit for tat began, Stuart, in your understanding, what is it that Canada could be doing? The options that Canada has now when we are going to be slapped with this tariff hike from midnight tonight?
Yeah, the options seem to be more or less where they were, in my mind, more or less where they were at the beginning when Trump decided, I'm going to attack the Canadian economy. Goes back all the way to November last year, when we found out we were a target, all the way through the threats of annexation. I think we should be taking the threats of the United States quite seriously, moving as fast as we can to disentangle ourselves, right? It's going to take a while. We're very dependent on the U.S. market for exports, but we do have options, and to just move forward. I don't know if people on the show have remember the Fraggle Rock, but there were the doozers on Fraggle Rock, these little green guys that were building these amazing futuristic-looking things, and the Fraggles every now and then came around and took a chunk out of it and destroyed what they were making, and they just kept going, right? So I think we have to keep going, doing what we need to do, right, to build out our economy. We should not be cutting public services as the government is proposing. We should not be looking back to the days of austerity. We're going to need to maintain public sector jobs, expand the public services to bring down the cost of living for Canadians, and really think about an industrial strategy, right, that puts Canadian inputs, Canadian products first.
There were many people we were speaking with earlier today, Stuart, and I asked this question about the possibility of Canada also getting this 90-day reprieve, because that was sort of bring us closer to negotiations where CUSMA is concerned, NAFTA 2.0 is concerned. But now we're looking at how the White House has gone ahead, President Trump has gone ahead, signed that executive order. So about that too, like Mexico has that option now, but we don't, by the looks of it at the moment. So what does that really mean?
Yeah, to me, it's like 6 of one and half a dozen of the other in a sense. Mexico's option, the 90-day period to continue negotiating. I mean, keep in mind, they're stuck at, I think, what was the deal? 30% for Mexico. So we're not far off, right, from what Mexico has. We have 35, they have 30. It's on non-CUSMA compliant goods in Mexico as well. So we're both still in the same boat. It's just that Mexico has this kind of, symbolic okay and yay Team Mexico from Trump. And we can continue talking for 90 days, whereas Canada doesn't have that officially. For whatever reason, it hasn't been announced in that way. But effectively, we both still have 90 days or 120 days or however much longer to negotiate a deal. And you're absolutely right to point out that 90 days gets us very close to that period in the U.S. where the United States Trade Representative is required to go to Congress and say, let's consult with business on the renewal review of the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement. So, drag this out a little bit longer. We might as well just say nothing and agree to nothing, and just wait and see what Trump wants to do, and Mexico as well, in that review process. I think that would be the smart thing for the government to do.
All right, Stuart, we really appreciate you joining us this evening and helping us break down this breaking news we are tracking this Thursday evening. Stuart True, International Trade Policy Researcher, Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Thanks once again, Stuart.
Pleasure. Thank you.